welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at, are those green spaces in our cities just nice to look at? Or do they actually have like some real power to cool things down?
Oh, we've got a really cool research article that dives right into that. It looks at Adama city in Ethiopia, and it uses, some pretty high-tech analysis to try to figure out if green spaces can really fight back against the urban heat island effect.
I heard the researchers actually found a magic number for how big a green space needs to be to like really make a difference in the temperature.
It's true. But before we get to that, maybe we should paint a picture of where this is all happening. So, Adama City, it's in Ethiopia's Great Rift Valley, and it has a subtropical climate. So, think hot, dry winters, and then summers that are sunny and warm. And the hottest and coldest months, May and December.
Sounds like a place that could definitely use some help staying cool.
For sure. And like a lot of cities that are growing really fast, Adama has seen its landscape change a lot in the past, 20 years or so.
Yeah, the research article showed a pretty big difference between the years 2000 and 2023.
Right. Satellite images, they actually show that dense vegetation went from covering 21.28% of the area down to, get this, only 13.15% in that same time frame. At the same time, built-up areas, they went from 22.97% to a whopping 62.24%.
That's a huge loss of greenery in a pretty short time. It makes sense why they were looking at the urban heat island effect.
Yeah, it's a major issue for cities all over the world. As urban areas get more and more dense with all that concrete and asphalt, it traps heat, and then they get way hotter than the rural areas around them.
It's like cities become these giant ovens, huh?
That's a great way to put it. And
Okay.
this study, well, they wanted to see if green spaces could be like a natural way to balance that out. So they used satellite data to look at the temperatures of the land's surface. And they found that the average temperature in Adama City, it went up by 3.53 degrees Celsius between 2013 and 2023.
Whoa, that's a big jump. Were the hottest areas the ones that lost the most vegetation?
Exactly. The areas with the least amount of greenery, especially those bare land and built-up areas, well, those got hit with the most intense heat. And there was even one district, it reached a scorching 34.26 degrees Celsius.
It really shows how taking away vegetation can directly make a city hotter.
And the study, it didn't stop at just looking at those patterns. They wanted to, measure how built-up areas were linked to those rising temperatures.
So is that where the NDBI comes in, the normalized difference built-up index?
You got it. The NDVI uses satellite images to track how much built-up areas are spreading. So basically, it tells us how much of the city is covered in man-made stuff.
And what did they find for Adama City?
Well, the NDVI showed a huge increase in built-up areas. It went from 13.67% back in 2000 all the way up to 55.29% in 2023. That just shows how fast development is happening and how much it's changing the landscape.
So basically they paved over a big chunk of the city in just over 20 years.
You could say that, but they didn't just stop there. They also wanted to see how healthy and dense the vegetation that was left actually was.
Okay, so I'm guessing this is where we get to the NDVI, the normalized difference vegetation index. It's like a checkup for how healthy the plants are, right?
Exactly. It measures how much healthy green vegetation is in a certain area.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, Adama City's NDVI score, it really dropped during the time of the study.
So less greenery overall, and what's left isn't as healthy either. That's not a good combo for a city that's already fighting rising temperatures.
You're right. But the researchers, they weren't just interested in keeping track of these changes. They wanted to figure out the direct link between vegetation and temperature.
So they had to find a way to isolate how much green spaces were cooling things down, right?
Right. And they did. They looked at areas with different levels of NDVI, and they found a clear connection. The areas with higher NDVI, which means more vegetation, and healthier vegetation, well, they had lower temperatures on the ground.
So the green spaces were doing their job, like little natural air conditioners sprinkled throughout the city.
Exactly. But now here's the big question. How much green space do you actually need to make a real difference?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Is like one tree enough to cool down a whole city block?
That's where things get really interesting. The researchers actually found a specific threshold, kind of like a magic number, for how effective green spaces are at cooling things down in Adama City.
All right, you got to tell me, what's this magic number?
They found that if a green space is bigger than 5.5 hectares, it consistently made a noticeable difference in the temperature. It actually lowered temperatures by about 2.85 degrees Celsius.
Wow, That's a pretty big change. So you need a certain amount of green space altogether to really make a difference in the urban heat island effect.
Urban planning gets really important.
That's a really cool magic number for green spaces. Like 5.5 hectares seems to be the sweet spot for making a city cooler. But how do we actually know if this research is, good research?
Yeah.
Did they just like look at some pictures from space and call it a day?
No, no, not at all. They actually took it a step further, and they went out into the field to make sure their findings were right. So they combined that high-tech analysis with, some good old-fashioned field work.
So they actually went to Adama City and measured the temperature themselves.
Yeah, exactly. They used GPS devices to find specific spots, and then they compared the temperatures they got on the ground to what they were seeing in the satellite images. Just making sure everything was accurate.
Yeah, that makes sense. Seeing patterns on a map is one thing, but it's important to check if it matches what's actually happening out there.
And when they did that ground truthing, they found some interesting things that they might missed if they only looked at the satellite data.
Oh, really? Like what? Did they find anything surprising?
Well, for example, they found that some of the hottest areas weren't always the ones with the most buildings. Sometimes, those empty lots just sitting there in the sun, well, they were actually hotter than the areas around them.
Wait, really? That's kind of weird. You'd think all that concrete and asphalt would be making things hotter.
It actually shows how important it is to have something covering the ground.
Yeah.
Bare ground, without any plants or anything, can absorb a ton of heat, like it's basically a giant solar panel.
So it's not just about how much green space a city has, but also where it is and what's around it.
Exactly. If you put even just a few parks or green corridors in the right spots, it can make a big difference in the temperature of the whole city.
This seems like it would be super helpful for urban planners, right?
Absolutely. This study gives them a lot of useful data and information they can use when they're designing and developing cities.
So what are some of the big takeaways for the people who are, actually shaping our cities?
Well, first of all, this research really confirms that urban green spaces aren't just like a nice to have, they're crucial. They're like part of the city's infrastructure, just like roads and buildings if you want a healthy and sustainable city.
They're like green air conditioners for the whole city.
Haha, that's a great way to put it. And second, it shows that size really does matter. I mean, yeah, little pockets of green, like trees along a street, can help cool down a small area. But if you want to fight that urban heat island effect, you need bigger green spaces, and they got to be in the right places.
Like it's a difference between having one fan and having central AC.
Exactly. And this study also shows that there's no one solution that works for every city. What's good for one city might not be good for another.
So there's no like universal magic number for green spaces that works everywhere.
Right. The researchers were very specific about their findings for Adama City and that 5.5 hectare threshold. That number came from looking at that city's particular climate, the land, and how it's being used already.
So other cities would have to do their own research to figure out what works best for them.
Exactly. But this study gives them a really good model to follow. It shows how powerful it can be to use these geospatial techniques like satellite imagery, GIS data, and those NDVI and NDBI measurements. It's all about using data to make smart decisions about how to plan a city.
It's like using science to help us design better cities.
That's the idea. And it's not just about controlling the temperature. Green spaces can also help absorb pollution, make things quieter, provide homes for wildlife, and just make life better for everyone.
They're like superheroes, fighting the heat and making cities better places to live at the same time.
Ah, exactly. And we can't forget about how good green spaces are for us mentally and socially, too. They give people places to relax, exercise, connect with nature, escape the city for a bit.
I know I always feel better after spending some time in a park or just walking down a street with trees.
There's actually a lot of research that shows that those feelings are real. Being around green spaces is linked to better mental health, less stress, and even more physical activity.
It sounds like green spaces are good for everyone and everything.
I think so. But let's be real, creating and maintaining green spaces takes money, land, and the support of leaders. That's not always easy, especially in cities with lots of people.
That's true, but wouldn't it be even worse to not do anything?
Exactly. Think about how much more energy we use to stay cool when it's hot. The health problems from extreme heat, people being less productive, and just a lower quality of life overall.
So investing in green spaces is actually good for the economy too, not just the environment.
That's what this research is telling us. The benefits of green spaces are much bigger than the costs, both now and in the future.
I'm definitely starting to see urban green spaces in a whole new light. They're not just something pretty to look at. They're a vital part of a city that's healthy, resilient, and sustainable.
I love that. What we've been exploring in this deep dive, the idea that green spaces are essential for our cities, and that using data and research can help us design and manage them better.
This has been really fascinating. We've learned so much about the urban heat island effect, the power of green spaces, and how important it is to use data to make good decisions about how our cities are planned.
It's been great talking about all this with you.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. We've learned a ton about the urban heat island effect, how powerful green spaces can be, and how important it is to use data and research when we're planning our cities.
It's been great exploring all of this with you.